Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Moore County Board of Education work session for Monday, January 7th to order. Happy New Year, everyone. Nice to see everyone here. Hope everybody rested a little during the holiday and took the needed time off to rejuvenate as much as possible. Ms. Carter, will you lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh, I guess we have to approve the agenda first. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Is there a second? Motion by Ms. Carter, second by Mr. Dennison. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Please join and stand me in the pledge. Please stand and join me in the pledge. Is it leap year or something?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in a moment of silence. All right, thank you. All right, Dr. Grimsey, we'll go ahead with the first item on the agenda, our audit for last year.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bundy will introduce our guests, and who will be familiar to us just one or twice a year, I guess.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, I'd like to present our auditors for the prior year, Dixon Hughes Goodman. I have with me Mr. Tyler Beatty and also Mr. Josh Purrier, and I'll have them present their information, and then at the end we'll open it up for any questions that you may have. And good to see you today, and welcome.
Hello. As Mike mentioned, my name's Tyler Beatty. I'm a assurance manager with Dixon Hughes Goodman. My colleague Josh Purrier, who also worked on the audit engagements, here with me today. As Mike also mentioned, we'll run through the slides, which includes discussion of the audit results, the communication reports to the board. We'll go through a quick review of the financial highlights, and then we'll also discuss the compliance audit. Alrighty, so the first slide is the discussion of the audit results. So all the hard work that everyone contributes to the audits primarily to enable us to issue an opinion on the financial statements. On this slide, I have an excerpt of our audit opinion, which is considered an unmodified opinion. This is the opinion that you want to receive and gives financial statement users an indication that the information is materially accurate in the financial statements. If you've ever heard of the term clean opinion, this is what this is. And our entire auditor's report can be found on page 1 of the CAFR. The next thing we'll discuss is our required communications report, which is a letter to the Board of Education. There are various aspects of the audit process that we're required to communicate to the board. The first thing is our responsibilities as it relates to the audit, and that is that it's based on generally accepted auditing standards and the OMB uniform guidance. Generally accepted auditing standards dictate the standards we must follow when performing the audit. The uniform guidance governs the compliance audit work. There was a new accounting standard that was implemented this year, which was GASB 75. GASB 75 is related to the accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions. The board has 2 OPEB plans. The Retiree Health Benefit Fund and the Disability Income Plan of North Carolina. If there were any disagreements or difficulties with management, it would be communicated in this report. We didn't have any difficulties or disagreements with management during the course of the audit. If there were any uncorrected misstatements, we would communicate this in this report. We didn't have any uncorrected misstatements through the course of the audit. And then the last item is management representations. We've attached the management representation letter that was signed by management. It's attached to this report so you can see what representations were given to us during the course of the audit. All right, so now we're going to go through a few of the financial highlights. The first slide is it's the general and restricted, so this would be your local Fund 2 as well as your restricted Fund 8. Your state, which is your Fund 1, and federal revenues, which is Fund 3. This is a graphical representation of their revenues for the current year period, which was 2018, as well as the 2 prior periods. A little bit of discussion about the general and restricted funding. This funding was around $33.6 million, which in 2018, which was an increase of $4.1 million when compared to the prior year. This increase was primarily related to increases in county appropriations. Personnel expenses for the general fund specifically, which are your 100 and 200 object codes, increased around $1.2 million in 2018 when compared to 2017. The green bar, which is your state funding, which is also Fund 1, your state public school fund, obviously, as you can see, represents the largest funding source for the board. The state public school funding increased approximately $800,000 when compared to the prior year. However, personnel expenses for the state public school fund, which once again are the 100 and 200 object codes, that increased around $412,000 from the previous year. So the majority of the increase was related to personnel expense increases. And then the smaller, we'll call it the lighter orange bar, is your federal funding, which represents Fund 3. Your federal funding increased around $1.4 million in 2018 when compared to 2017. The largest increase was the special education cluster of federal programs, which increased around $1.3 million. And then there's a schedule of federal awards that starts on page 90 of the CAFR, which would detail all the federal programs and the funding received for 2018. And once again, this slide gives you a good representation of how much the board relies on state funding. So when you hear about there's state funding appropriations or in the balance and the board doesn't know exactly how much appropriations they're going to get from the state, that's why that has a huge factor in how it's difficult to budget for the next fiscal year until that state funding's finalized. So the next slide is it's expenditures by purpose as a percentage of total general, state, and federal expenditures. And what this slide is trying to do is trying to give you a visual representation of where monies are being spent each year. You'll notice that the board has consistently spent around 77% on instructional services, which are the 5,000 purpose codes, with the remaining 23% being spent on operational services, which are the 6,000 purpose codes. As auditors, we're looking for consistency from year to year, which this slide obviously indicates. Also, we think it's important to note that the proportions have remained the same in 2018 and 17, even given the increases in funding that the board received in 2018. So what that tells us as auditors is you're continuing to spend in the same proportion, which is what we would like to see. The next slide is your general and restricted revenue fund balance, which includes your Fund 2 general fund as well as your Fund 8 restricted fund. And so this slide details the fund balances of the prior 3 years. The board had appropriated $613,500 in Fund 2 fund balance, and the entire Fund 8 fund balance of $3.4 million is restricted. The unassigned fund balance is $2.2 million at June 30th, 2018. The board saw an increase in fund balance from 2018 when compared to 2017. It was related a little bit to the increase in county funding, but it was primarily related to excess sources of revenue over expenditures that were received in the restricted fund. Our understanding of these revenue sources is that it was a timing of when payments were received for certain discretionary grants, and that funding will be spent in fiscal year 2018-19.
Can Mr. Bundy elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. We got in 2018, we got 2 Medicaid payments toward, one during the year, one at the end of the year, right at the end of June, which accounted for about $700,000. So that's part of the increase in the Fund 8 fund balance. And also the board set aside, has designated money to be a temporary bridge in the current year, 18-19, to fund needs that the district has as far as nurses, psychologists, and those areas. So the funding will be spent down in the coming year as those are projected and as we meet the needs of our nurse program through our fund date. So fund date, fund balance will, next year, my expectation will be that you'll see that fund balance start decreasing because of the reliance on fund date to fund those positions. So as the years go on, that fund balance has a limited life, but that fund balance is available to meet the needs currently of the district.
Okay, Mike, is it accurate to say that the green represents the combination of the two funds?
Yes, sir, the green is a combination.
All right, so what, and then the difference between the purple and the green is what?
The difference between the purple and the green is some non-spendable items such as inventories, prepaid items that would be a part of your total fund balance, but any stabilization amounts and non-spendable amounts, and specifically the general fund, wouldn't be even available for appropriation.
Set aside that for some of your receivables that are in your asset section. You have to set aside some of your fund equity to meet those receivables as part of your fund balance.
And that's required by state statute.
Management of fund balance is a very sensitive area.
Right, of course.
In this report. There's a lot of pages, but this is the one
Yeah, of
page that the
course.
county manager and the commissioners and all the school
Right.
board members go to. So, board members, I just want to pause and make sure that all of you all can ask whatever question you want at this point. We want to make sure that the public is real clear on the fidelity of our management of the fund balances.
And so the available fund balance, is that the orange bar?
Right, so
The orange bar. Mhm. The orange bar is your unassigned fund balance, which is funds that aren't committed to a purpose. Those are available for meeting cash flow needs of the district, to meet payroll, to meet demands of consultant and vendor payments. So that's what those are for, is mainly to maintain cash flow in the district.
And our target there is around two million.
Yeah, we like to at least keep a minimum of 2 million in that kind of unassigned fund balance just for those purposes. Yes.
So we can see where we got in a little trouble in 2016. We were able to build that back up to 2 million. And since then, each year, it has been this board's goal to reserve 2 million as a cash fund balance. We always use the example of federal reimbursements that get behind schedule and making sure we can make payroll with our on the federal side. So hopefully, I think you'll look with satisfaction at that orange bar. That's very consistent, gets back to the consistency issue. Clarify the green and the purple one more time in the context of the green. Then green, in the context of the orange. If we know that the about roughly 2 million, give or take, is the balance in Fund 2, the cash balance, then green is the accumulation of Fund 8.
So
two.
the green bar, it includes all of your Fund 8. There's no Fund 8 fund balance in the orange bar because it's all restricted.
Okay.
So if you think about the purple bar, that's all your fund balance, including non-spendable amounts, AR amounts that are basically to be required to be restricted by North Carolina state statutes. The green bar is the available for appropriation fund balance, which is basically all your fund balance less those state statute required reserves, we'll call them. Included in that green bar, specific programs in the restricted fund where those amounts are restricted specific to that program or specific to other purposes. What's also included in that green bar is any amounts that have been appropriated for subsequent year expenditures in the general fund. So that's 613,000 also included in the orange bar. And then to your point, Dr. Grimsey, the orange bar is your unassigned fund balance. So this is your cash reserves, basically. And there's the subsequent slide we'll actually talk a little bit more to try to break it down from just quantitative dollar amounts to really a little bit more qualitative information.
Just want to make sure, before we go to that one, I want to
Yeah,
make sure
of
everybody
course.
understands this one, because
Yeah,
it's
of
very
course.
important. Anybody else?
Question. Mr. Bundy, I know that our orange fund balance there is a continual flow in and out because we're covering things that we are responsible for before the federal government pays up, or even state budgets are set and whatnot. Is 2 million enough? Is that an adequate amount to handle all of these
Well,
bills
You can
that
give
come
your-
in and out?
You can give your opinion.
Finance
Mike,
meeting.
you have my,
Never enough.
you have my permission to give your personal opinion.
I think 2 million is somewhat low because of just the needs of the district and the cash flow needs, the federal reimbursement, as Dr. Grimercy referred to. I would like it to see, make it be 3 to 4. It would be a more comfortable level, but the district has established not a policy, but a goal to have at least 2 million there to cover the cash needs of the district, which the district is doing adequate job of. But to me, it's a little low, but we continue to manage those resources, and meet the needs of the district. We spend the state dollar first and hold on to local as long as possible.
So, and I guess, not to fast forward, but to further illustrate Mike's point, your unassigned fund balance is around 1.9% of your total governmental expenditure, so that equates to 7.15 days that the board could operate on its fund balance if funding was ceased. So,
I have a question on fund balance. If we use the fund balance to pay bills because we didn't get a governmental payment that we expected, and we take that money out of fund balance, what do we do when we get the governmental payment?
Reimburse.
It basically just reimburses the funding that was
Okay,
issued.
so you automatically reimburse
Yeah, and
fund
sometimes the federal
balance.
funding's slow in timing to come to the district.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. So you reimburse it, so
Yes, sir.
it really shouldn't, overall, it should not have any effect on the
Yes,
fund
sir.
balance.
Well, I think it's remarkable that we still are able to maintain 2+ million in the unassigned amount when we're almost $1 million less available to us from 2 years ago. So I think that's doing well for us, and that we're being good stewards of our money.
This has nothing to do with the current presentation, but do we have any funds that are due to us that are shut down with the government, shut down in DC?
There is some concern of the payments maybe being somewhat slower in your federal programs, in your child nutrition programs. There was an email that came out from our child nutrition director just expressing some concern over that. But hopefully it's just a slower payment and we'll still continue to receive those funds. It's kind of a unknown at this point how long that government shutdown will last and what the impact will be. But so far, we're receiving that. The money's still coming in. It may be coming just at a little bit slower pace.
And that's
Department of Education is not included among the federal agencies that are subject to the partial shutdown at this time. It is partial, and they're not part of the part. But USDA,
I think they are.
I think they are.
Yeah, they are. So, and that's where the nutrition
So
money
the
comes
area that
from.
we might have concern about is child nutrition.
Child nutrition.
May we continue? Thank you, gentlemen.
yeah, so to further elaborate on the fund balance discussion, what this graph represents is your general and restricted revenues fund balance. It's a percentage of governmental expenditures. The governmental expenditures excludes your capital outlay fund and your individual schools fund. So for 2018, it's 5.29%. Your available for appropriation fund balance is 5.29% of expenditures. Your unassigned fund balance is 1.96. So your green bars actually decrease a little bit, even though your fund balance from a dollar standpoint is increased. That's because there was an increase in expenditures. And what I mentioned previously, if you want to really illustrate this from a days perspective, so your available for appropriation fund balance converted to days is 19.3 days of operating expenditures, and your unassigned fund balance is 7.15 days. So if funding were to cease, those are the amount of days that you could operate this board before your fund balance would be deteriorated. I think it's important to mention there is no set guidelines or state mandated thresholds from the state about the fund balance required to hold. From what we've seen, the majority of fund balance activity and where it's at, it's really, it's dependent on your relationship with the county and whether the counties, the respective county for the LEAs providing enough appropriations for the LEA to carry a fund balance. And I would say the fund balance level here, it's probably right in the middle of what we see, as far as there are others that have a lot higher and others that are a lot lower. But if you talk to a financial advisor, if you think about your fund balance as a savings account, and you told him 7.3 days of savings, you can imagine the response for
We
that.
do not anticipate a partial shutdown.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
That was gonna be my question. So basically, with the experience that you have, our available fund balance is medium to what you have seen other districts.
right, yeah, and it's kind of, it's a difficult question to ask because a lot of it depends on the relationship with the LEA and the respective counties. So some LEAs don't carry a fund balance because the county doesn't supply enough appropriations to carry a fund balance, whereas others have these huge fund balances, but, you know, the understanding at the county level is they have the fund balance. So when you think about the support on an annual basis, it's not maybe as increasing, decreasing appropriations on an annual basis because they have that fund balance. So I say all that to say there's a lot of factors, but what we look at as auditors is there a decrease of fund balance on an annual basis, and is it for recurring expenditures? And the similar we always hear is, are you using your fund balance, or are you using your savings account to make your mortgage payment, right? So fund balance should be used for expenditures that are non-routine, non-recurring. If you're using your fund balance for expenditures that are occurring every year, you're gonna run out. There's gotta be a plan set in place for that, and that doesn't appear to be the case here.
Well, that was a strategic move by Mr. Bundy and Dr. Grimacy to make sure that we did only use the fund balance. We did not use it for reoccurring expenditures. So that means we're moving in the
Took a lot
direction
of
we
hard-
intended.
Took
And that threw a lot of work.
Yeah, it took a lot of hard work to,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Which
to
was
get where we
not
are.
true in the past. You know,
Right.
we used it.
No.
But what's helped is the county, like a couple of years ago, gave us $1.7 million. And that's why the fund balance went down, because they agreed to appropriate expenses that we had with the state that we didn't know we were gonna have when we
Right.
did the budget. As long as they continue to do that, that helps a lot.
So our last slide in this financial section is it's a snapshot of the Child Nutrition Fund. It's going to look a little unorthodox this year due to the implementation of GASB 75. The big takeaways for the Child Nutrition Fund is that your cash balance has increased $286,000 when compared to last year. Your operating revenues have also increased $41,000 in the current year, which is a testament to the fund, because I think the majority of our other LEA clients, they continue to see decreases in your food sales from year over year just due to the healthy food regulations and less student participation in the fund. Your personnel expenses increased $177,000 in the current year for the Child Nutrition Fund, which is primarily related to increases in retirement rates related to your pension and OPEB. And then since your Child Nutrition Fund is full accrual, it also had some retirement expenses recorded in the account, which you don't see from a governmental fund level.
So are there losses then at the end of the year?
So there was a net loss before transfers of $84,000, and then there was a transfer from the state public school fund for a portion of salaries of $45,000. So I think the net loss after transfers was around $40,000, give or take. But how much indirect cost do you remember off the top of your head, if any?
Given where child nutrition is, they're pretty much a break-even enterprise, a little loss, but not a dramatic
Right.
loss. We don't charge any direct cost to child nutrition. The $45,000 transfer that Mr. Beatty referred to as a requirement by the state to apportion part of that to the state public school fund. That's a requirement by the state to pay part of that from the state school fund, so that's a requirement. However, you'll see that the losses are very minimal as far as your child nutrition fund, and they have a good, healthy balance. They have a good amount of cash on hand to meet the needs that they have in the child nutrition fund. It is admirable that the revenue sales have gone up, given the challenges of meeting the nutrition needs that are required by the child nutrition fund. So they're holding their own. They're a slight loss, but I think they've done an admirable job in managing their resources.
So the $84,000 in transfers, what is that from?
That's your net loss. It's before the $45,000 transfer in from a different fund.
So
So what this is trying to illustrate is this is your pure, like if you think about an operating entity, it's their true revenues and expenses before any support provided by the state.
So is that also including money the schools have to repay when children don't pay for lunches?
There would be some of that would be part of your child nutrition revenue. That's correct.
Would come back in as a transfer from the schools?
It wouldn't come back in. We actually write a check to child nutrition for those dollars from the school and from district resources.
But just,
But-
to- I'm sorry, just to make clear though, that the school actually, for all that was unpaid, the school, that individual school pays for it out of their funds, correct?
Yeah, typically what we do is we look at the unpaid lunches, and then we try to look at the resources that the school has provided to recoup those costs. And then we usually share that cost between the school and the district.
Okay, so
the
it would come out of that.
Yeah,
That's-
so the
that was my
district
question.
pays at least, not a lion's share, but they at least pay a proportional share. We try to at least split it or do a little better than a split and provide that funding, because child nutrition can't fund those lunches at a loss.
Right.
So we make those resources available and actually write a check to child nutrition.
And where do the district funds come from?
They come from Fund 2, local funds.
So that diminishes the cash balance.
I think it's a surprise to most people that the child nutrition department basically is an entity into itself,
It is.
that we really don't control their funds and must simply ensure that they meet their needs and don't come in at a loss at all. And it's something that we don't really
Child nutrition.
control.
That's right. Child nutrition is the enterprise fund, which is, as Tyler referred, is separate from a governmental fund. So they have a for-profit motive to the operating of the fund,
A limited for-profit.
a limited
Yeah.
for-profit.
Yeah, they have a
Well-
motive to make sure they balance their books.
Yeah. Well, and I think as auditors, what we look at when we're looking at a child nutrition fund is your cash balance. And that's what's similar to what the DPI or the child nutrition arm at DPI looks at. So they usually want the child nutrition fund to have over 1 month's operating expenditures in cash, but they never want the school child nutrition fund to have too much cash, because they want it to be under 3 months. So that's kind of their balancing act, which here is what it is. And obviously, as you can see, the cash balance is healthy to provide, resources, and it's in excess of 1 month operating expenditures, especially with no indirect costs being charged. The net loss is right where we would expect it to be. Sometimes it might be a little green, sometimes it might be a little red, but as long as it's, when you think about a paradigm shift either way, it's not a lot, so.
Well, obviously, I'm thinking on to next year, but are we going to show some losses thanks to the hurricane last fall? Or has the federal government helped us make up the loss in, say, food supplies that had to be discarded?
We have, we filed some claims with FEMA to recoup the loss of food. And also, in October, the state allowed us to recoup some of that cost through reimbursable meals. So I don't think we'll see a substantial change in child nutrition this year. I would expect similar results, that they would
good.
run about break even, maybe a little loss, maybe a little gain, but they would be pretty much in a break even scenario by the end of the year.
Mike, do we have insurance that covers food loss and something like a school loss freezer?
We have insurance. Insurance covers a lot of your structural loss for buildings through public school fund and through the school board's trust. As far as the food loss, some of that is limited insurance. However, though, we can file through FEMA and get most of that recouped. We've got a current claim with FEMA to recover food loss. The food loss through the hurricane was around $15,000 to $16,000 total. And our total claim through FEMA that we haven't received payment for yet is around $68,000. So it wasn't a significant loss, but there was some loss that we're trying to cover through federal government, through FEMA insurance claim.
But if we had the problem and it wasn't due to a hurricane, it was just at a particular school,
Yeah.
our insurance cover that? It wasn't due to any disaster, so
Like a
would
power
FEMA be
outage.
involved?
But you may be able to cover it through some power outages and things, but insurance is primarily for your building and your structure. If it's due to those damages, then there may be some possibility to cover some replacement of food, that was spoiled in the coolers.
Is FEMA also affected by the shutdown? So will our reimbursement for some of that be delayed potentially?
We're currently working with we have a contact who has been working with us throughout the term of the claim, and they haven't mentioned any slowdown as far as a reimbursable claim, and we're still providing information to them, and hopefully I'm expecting to be settled in the next couple of weeks at the most, because
That would be our FEMA claim,
our FEMA claim, yes, sir.
because we don't know about the partial government shutdown.
No, FEMA claim, correct.
When we did the reimbursable meals in October, were the schools still able to go on and sell the extra snack items that they sell that help them balance their books? Or were
I would
those,
probably refer to John, I would assume so.
Probably want to hear my answer there.
okay,
I'll just lean in. During the month of October, we got reimbursed for just the meal only. So that's a required meal, the plate with the primary food, the vegetables, the fruits, and the milk or whatever. The school could still do supplemental sales and sell additional meals, and a student could get 2 meals and still we'd get reimbursed for 2 meals if that student was really hungry. So we had a good month. We got our numbers finally, and they'll be in the board update coming in January to give you a complete rundown of it.
good.
All right, we've gotten off topic a little bit.
We're only 15 minutes behind on the first item on the agenda, so I'm completely calm.
Well, I'll speed it up. So the last few slides, and it'll be easy to discuss because there were no findings in anything, is the compliance audit. So as auditors, we do a financial statement audit, which is similar to a traditional audit that every for-profit entity would go to. In addition to that, we do a compliance audit or a single audit based on the uniform guidance as discussed earlier that requires us to look at certain major federal programs and state programs. This assessment's done based on risk, and it includes quantitative dollar amounts as well as qualitative other factors. You'll notice 3 different compliance reports. In the CAFR, the first report is what most consider the Yellow Book report, and we're required to evaluate the board's compliance with laws and regulations, contracts and agreements, and also grant agreements as part of Yellow Book. And once again, including the CAFR is what's known as our Yellow Book report, and it summarizes the results of this. Related to the Yellow Book, we didn't have any findings. The second report, we're also required to evaluate the board's compliance with federal programs that we consider major programs for the current period under audit. For fiscal year 2018, we noted the Title I program, which was considered major and required to be audited. We didn't have any findings related to the Title I program. And then the last report that you'll find in the CAFR is the report on state awards. Once again, we're required to evaluate the board's compliance with state programs that are deemed to be major. We noted 2 programs which were considered to be major and were required to be audited. It was the State Public School Fund and the Career and Technical Education State Months of Employment Program, and there were no findings to report. So we'll open it up to any additional questions or anything that might get help with.
Are there any other questions or comments? All good?
Madam Chairman, you'll notice that under Superintendent's recommendation, we'll just ask the board to consider a motion to approve the financial statements at your meeting next week.
Sounds good.
At this time, Madam Chair, with your permission,
Yes, please.
we'll proceed. I'll turn it over to your thank you, gentlemen.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Turn it over to your legislative liaisons, Mr. Dennison and Dr. Wells Brown.
Okay, everyone received the priorities, and I guess I'll give you some specific recommendations that I have later on, but is there anything in the priorities that you feel we're missing that should be included?
I just had a question regarding our lottery funds. I know there's been lots of discussion in the past with regard to disbursements and how that is divvied out down to schools. But it appears that we are just losing out with regard to construction funds being available from the lottery, and I'm wondering, is there not something that we should put in, or should we try to appeal and go after those dollars? It's just a question.
Okay, well,
I know I've been out of the loop, but I mean, there are millions coming in for lottery, and I'm just wondering, is there something in our legislative follow-up that do we need to do?
I can give you the answer. That to do something, it would be the statewide bond that's in that right now the bill, I think, is $1.9 billion. But with that bond, we were scheduled, and they have in there exactly what the different counties are going to get, and we were scheduled to get $8 million if that one passed. Well, people years ago, originally when the lottery fund started, we were getting 40% of the lottery funds to use for construction. But about 5 or 6 years ago, they stopped that and just made it $100 million even for all the LEAs in the state. So people were complaining about, well, why don't they go back to 40%? But we didn't give them any reasons how they should do it. So they're doing that now. What they're doing is they're doing the extra money for construction they're giving to the Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools that we're not getting any of. So the lottery fund will be providing more money for construction, but we won't be getting any of it. So when I talk with the legislatures, my thing's going to be consider if we get this bond passed, consider what we get and have the counties that have received over $100 million already, have that be a consideration instead of doing it the way they did before. Because since they came out with that bill, several of those Tier 1, Tier 2 counties have gotten over $100 million in construction.
Wow.
So that's,
I think the thing that I would add, and thank you for bringing up the lottery piece, but also on the K-3 class size, I wonder if we can add something about any impact that that's having on our grade 4 through 12 in terms of class sizes that we have there. If there's any language that we can add to that section.
I think, and we can talk about this when Tim and Kate do theirs, but I don't think we're going to be doing anything with the K-3. I think personally, K-3 won't hurt us badly. Where it's really going to hurt people is when they don't have the rooms to do it. But I think with our new elementary schools, we'd be in a lot better shape than we are now. What we need to do is look at what the teachers, the funding allotment they're giving us for teachers, and they need to understand what effect that's having on us for classroom teachers, without using any local funds. I mean, you'll see in the report that they give later on average class sizes and all. Well, the General Assembly said it doesn't matter, 4 through 12, classes can be as large as you want. I think they need to understand how large those classes would be if we only use the classroom teachers that they allotted to us. But we have, I know, at least 54, probably more classroom teachers that are being paid for locally. So I think that would be the approach rather than K through 3, when they give the report, you'll see what that'll do for teachers for us. The other thing we were using the additional teachers K through 3 was for the art and music and those, and they're gradually increasing those every year. I can't remember exactly what it's going to be this year, but supposedly, what was it, in 3 or 4 years, we're supposed to be fully complemented, so we wouldn't have to take them from someplace else.
Well, we wouldn't be complimented to take them away from program enhancement classes, but there is the reality that, and again, we keep referring to that report, we'll see it later, But there are definite increases in 4 through 12 core content classes as a result of our need to comply with them.
Right. And my point is, legislature needs to understand what that is. We can't just tell them our classes are getting larger. Instead of showing them our class size is 29 because we're using fixed sector teachers, we need to show
We'll
them
do that today.
class sizes are 40. And if they actually, when they see what's really would happen if we didn't put these additional classroom teachers in, I think it'll be a surprise to them. But they don't understand education, so you really have to explain it to them well. Show them what's happening.
If there's
Well, we
just,
will, we'll have
Oh,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
good.
today, but when you leave here today, you'll have that.
Good.
Right.
I think my point was just if there's a way to add some language to our K-3 class size, or maybe a separate line, just to talk about that we want to keep our eye on the class sizes in 4 through 12 and do some advocacy on that. I think that was my point.
Well, we
Maybe
can,
some of the
we can
data
add
that we have
something
today.
in, but the K3 really shouldn't have any effect on that, but we can put it in there.
Or it could be a separate line item.
Yeah,
It doesn't-
for class
yeah.
sizes 4 through 12, definitely we can do it. So I'll add something in there on that. Because that's really where the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, as far as they're concerned, it really doesn't matter how many kids we have in the class.
What other thoughts did people have on?
Yeah, any else?
The, one that I see is very, very important is the attempt to make permanent the 15-point scale for the A through F school grades, knowing that that's going to lapse shortly and we're going to all across North Carolina look like our schools are failing. That should be like a number one item on this list. And you've got both the low-performing schools as well as the accountability issue, but in my mind, we need to move that to the top.
I'll cover that, because I'm gonna recommend some priorities. I just want to see if there was anything else to add. And particularly when we get to that, I'll give you a lot more specific information on exactly what's going on there. So if there aren't, what I'd like to do is,
Mr. Dennison, if you could.
yes,
If I might, the staff would ask that the board would consider some statement on testing. The Moore County School staff has communicated very vigorously to DPI our concern, particularly about the length of testing for particularly our youngest children. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned about testing. But if we were put into a position as a staff where we needed to pick one, our number one, where we would start, would be the amount of time it takes. And I think, simply put, it can't be too difficult for the General Assembly to consider issuing a report on an assessment of the amount of time that children are in tests, and we could start with grades 3 and 4. What does the public know about how, and I'm not talking about turning around and finding out how much testing the locality does exclusive of the EOGs. We're talking about the EOG test, the end of grade tests. There's been a lot of redirection of the conversation to NC check-ins and the assessments during the year, much of which localities do because the state, through some other venue, is requiring that. And so what we'd like to know is just about the EOG tests, statewide. What is the state doing to track the amount of time it takes for an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old to take a core content test? Our study shows that the average time is 2.5 hours per core content test. That means there's a range from an hour to over 4 hours for an 8 or a 9-year-old taking a state EOG test. And so, very simply put, some of the other associations across the state have advanced this conversation, and we will continue as a staff to advance that conversation because to date, I have not received satisfactory explanation of where we can find any study that shows that that's developmentally appropriate.
Now,
I can't find it.
who determines the EOG test? That's DPI, right?
Yeah.
Well, they're doing so under state statute.
Now,
Yeah.
but does the statute give the test, or the statute just says you have to measure this some way?
She said you have to
Measure it.
Well, I don't know who says it, but I do know one thing, we're in trouble if we don't administer those tests. So I think that right now, it just simply put, it would be nice if the General Assembly, like it does with many other issues, weighs in on this one question that most parents and most teachers are talking about, but nobody else seems to be. And the staff would, I think certainly if you're interested in our priorities, the sunset on the 15-point grading scale is something that should be a very high priority. And the amount of time, among the many issues we can discuss about testing, I think the one that's just very simple is, what does the state know about how long it takes for our 8 and 9-year-olds in North Carolina to take each core content test, and is that developmentally appropriate? And
We can all answer that, can't
and we'd like, we can answer that for our children.
Yeah.
We'd like to know how North Carolina answers that.
I think we could be effective there in talking to the legislature. They won't change the test, but that's another thing. They have no clue how many hours it's taking. So if I could have each test and the range for each one and how much time, with the grade level, so they know. I think they want to cut down on the test, and Johnson does too, but he hasn't done it yet. What happens is the legislature passes a statute, gives it to DPI to administer, and they put everything they can think of for us to do in there to help them measure how we're doing. Half of it probably which we do not need. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Legislatures may not change the test, but they could if they knew what was going on, they would do something about it, if they really understood it.
Especially with the children with disabilities, it's even longer.
Oh, sure, it varies. I mean, one test, as Dr. Grimsey said, one could take an hour and one could take 3 hours to finish the same test, so.
So what did you want to propose to us?
Okay, my recommendation for priorities is I handed this out to you. For school grades, 15-10 point scale, low performing schools. Student support personnel, and this is just recommendation now, but we have 2 more items. School resource officers and school construction. And if you look at the information I gave you for the chart, this chart that shows very specifically the significance of school growth. And it's the chart, you look at the growth. No. Yeah, that one. This one right here that Betty has. This one, if you look at that, it very specifically says that growth is the most important factor in determining what happens with our kids in the school. So my reasoning is, with that being the case, that if growth is so important, why don't we give more growth, give more value to growth? And who needs the value more on growth? Is it our Title I schools? Yes, the Title I schools' growth is really important. And if growth is important in Title I schools, why don't we give more significance to how those Title I schools do in determining their school performance grade or score using the growth factor? And
Dennison, I want to remind you, we're not projecting this document, so the
oh,
audience.
right. Yeah, this is just a proposal. This is nothing.
Well, it is an official document now that we've introduced
Yeah,
it. So
I'm
I
sorry.
want to make sure that Mary Kate is able to follow. I knew you were
I'll-
collecting this information, but I didn't know you were going to present it
I
today.
almost made a copy for Mary Kate. I'm sorry.
Well, I
Mary
just
Kate.
gave her mine.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
if you
have
could,
the
as you
same
go
thing.
through, just be sure she's clear on what page you're on, if you could.
Okay.
The one that says school performing use 40%. It's one, it looks like this, Mary Kay.
So this is, just so we're clear, Ed, this is data that you have compiled from various conversations.
He's worked with staff.
Right, with
Staff
the
on that.
information available
And
here.
what you have here is sort of your initial rationale for what we would present or talk about with the legislatures.
Correct.
And this is the rationale behind wanting to focus on
Right. And one,
growth rather than
No, I know.
performance.
and it's because I forgot to go through here. So, what I've done on the school performance scores is that growth is the most significant factor. If that's true, shouldn't we emphasize growth more for the score? Title I schools is where it's really important. We should give more importance to that. So if if the growth score that were applicable to the Title I schools were based on the number of disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged students they have, the more economically disadvantaged students they have, their growth should count more on the school performance score. This is complicated, I know. But the growth should count more for them, the more economically disadvantaged students they have.
So what you've done here is on the left-hand side. On the left-hand side is the current information of what their scores are, correct?
17, 18.
Yeah, and then if we counted growth through this process here, then these would be the scores on the right-hand side.
Correct, correct. So what I put in for growth factor, just, I said, if we use 40, now it's 80% achievement, 20% growth for everybody. If we use for growth for the Title I schools, if we use 40% of their
Growth.
percentage of economically disadvantaged children, the more economically disadvantaged they have, the greater the percentage would be that would count for those schools towards actually getting growth. And that's the chart I have on the growth, but that would only be applicable if they meet growth.
So this is
Going
really,
along with that, then I say if they meet, any school that meets growth should not be considered a low-performing school.
so the purpose for all this data is just to really back up your request or your suggestion that we prioritize one of our legislative priorities being looking at growth versus performance.
More that not for us as much as the legislature.
Well, right, this would help the legislature. This is the data that you would then provide our legislative representatives. And so the data that you
If
have.
I might, Madam Chair, if I
Go
could
ahead.
just help out, there's one item here titled low-performing schools.
Right.
Revise the definition. Mr. Dennison, would that be the appropriate one that would perhaps stand out as a priority then?
Well, it's included in, these all three go together. There's no separating the two in selling them on what needs to be done. Growth is an important factor. We need to give growth more score to the Title I schools. And if they're meeting their growth, they're doing a good job. They're not falling behind. And if they're meeting growth, then they should not be considered a low-performing school if they meet growth.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily testing your command of the details as much as I was looking at the legislative priorities itself. We have two sections, one under ensuring student success, low-performing schools, and then the other one is under accountability, school grades. So the discussion, as I understand it, and as staff wants to support you on this, is we're trying to determine what the priorities are. So it would seem to me as though that the two sections titled low-performing schools and school grades would then elevate and become a priority. Is that,
Those three.
I just counted two.
No, the 10-point scale is one. I've got my papers all over.
Well, the 15-point scale is under the school grades.
Well, it's on
section.
there, but not on what I,
Well, it is. It's mentioned under the school grades section. If you look at the second page, and Mary Kate, I'm now back to the legislative priorities document that
It
is.
is on there if they want to
Yeah, if
do
we would
that
just,
blue
yeah,
link.
if we could just, go ahead and stay there.
She can
yeah.
see it.
Well, they were there, and then they lost,
goes.
yeah, we lost them. So what I'm trying to help the board move ahead with, because again, we didn't schedule this much time for this item, just recognizing that it seems clear that no matter what the details are of where we want to go, that the board is putting a premium on low-performing school, the definition of low-performing schools, and where school grades fit into that.
recommend for the three priorities I have for that, and none of these that cost the legislature any money. School grades, 1510, and low-performing schools. It's really it all ties together. And the other ones, Senator McInnes asked for 3 wants and 3 needs. And my plan would be, after we determine what our priorities here, that this be presented, and maybe Betty can go with me to speak to Tom and Jamie and Alan, maybe individually or together, to let them know what they are. But I considered the wants as the school grades, the point scale, in the low-performing schools, because that's not going to cost them anything. But our needs really are what we need, that we need to determine whether it's going to be support personnel, SROs, schools instruction, or I'm separating if it costs them some money versus it doesn't cost them money. we're a lot more likely to get things that do not cost money than ones
Will
that do
be
cost.
ones that we can get.
If I could offer a procedural recommendation, Madam Chair?
Yes.
What I'd recommend, it does not appear as though this item is ready for action next week. Do you have more work to do on this?
Oh,
or-
yeah, yeah.
Were you hoping they'd act on the board would act on this next week, or is this?
Yeah, next week, well, we can fix this up for
our
next week.
priorities.
Okay,
To establish the priorities, and then it's gonna take a lot of time, once we establish the priorities, how we go about selling it. And remember, they're not gonna buy everything, but we may
Well,
have
and
to compromise.
I'd like to offer that we don't do that many priorities. We stick to maybe, 3 to 5 priorities and then reference this list, because this is a good list from the NCSBA,
Oh, yeah,
correct?
yeah.
And then add what we talked about with testing, make sure that we have that here.
Yeah.
Class sizes in 412, but
Yes.
just really simplify this. A lot of what you presented today appears to be some of the backup that we need when we actually talk with.
Well, it's not listed just like this, like, I have 3 covered for one presentation as far as I'm concerned.
my thinking isn't quite as heroic as
Okay.
everybody else's, I'm just trying to think.
Okay,
Trying to
well,
get us
well,
to next week.
Between now and,
We'll
no, by the time we upload the agenda on Friday at lunchtime on Friday, I'm just want to make sure, how can the staff help the board get to where the board needs to be so that we can do final review of a document that gets uploaded on Friday afternoon? If we could just clarify that.
To me, if we could just provide wording for what our priorities should be, the 3 or 4, regarding the 15-point scale, regarding end-of-grade testing. If we could just have the bullet items here that lists what those priorities are, to me, that's what we would need to see to be able to vote.
That's what you
I
want, isn't
agree.
it, Ed? The top
Yeah,
3
yeah,
priorities.
but I don't think it's gonna be, with what's going on here today, I've lost a sheet somewhere too, that it won't be ready for them, but that won't stop us from doing stuff. We know, if something comes up right now that I can act on, I know pretty much what our priorities are. We can formalize it later, but to have everything ready by Friday, I think might be a chore.
And that's all I was thinking. I just want to make sure we serve the board.
But it won't stop me from going ahead and
Okay.
doing stuff.
So we would aim for maybe
February.
the February work
Yeah,
session
February
that
work
we would,
session.
and perhaps the chair could consult with the liaisons to.
'Cause I still have a lot of work to do on presenting them, not so much as this,
Okay,
but I have a good feel of what your priorities are.
We've done some great work here.
Yeah,
A lot
no.
of good information
Well,
here, and we're very
we
appreciative.
have to remember that these guys and gals don't know anything about education, and we can't ask for stuff. We have to show them stuff
Yeah, visually.
and say, don't you think we need something to resolve this problem?
thank you,
Point.
Mr. Dennis. And Madam Chair, I'll note that as a February item,
Yes.
and we'll look for your guidance after consultation with the budget liaisons. And whatever the staff can do to help, we appreciate the board considering the staff's concerns specific to, we tried to be as
Oh,
specific as
definitely, sure.
possible, try not to be too broad, and we hope that you find that to be helpful.
What I would like to see on the testing though is, I remember when Robin made the presentation, I tried to get all of it down, but I didn't. Just the test for each grade, the amount of time required, minimum, maximum.
We can include that again in the board, we can brush the dust off that a little bit, there's not much, we've kept up with it. And Kate and Mr. Locklear could potentially put that in your end of January monthly update. And before that gets published, once they're ready to send it out, we'll just send it out in advance of the monthly update and then include it again in the monthly update.
And we want to focus on what the state's requiring of us and staying away from what we're doing.
Yeah, one of the reasons why, if I could, I just want to make clear the difference between the narrative that's going on statewide, which there seems to be a little bit of tug of war between the locale, what are the local assessments that the local localities are requiring that teachers use to assess where children are relative. There's a lot of misunderstanding on what is a local assessment that's done because the locality chooses to do it, and what is a local assessment that the locality is doing because the state has another requirement that requires an assessment. I've tried, the senior staff has tried to simplify this conversation, get it down to think of an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old taking a math test, a science test, a social studies test, and an English language arts test. How long does it take that child to take the test, and to what extent is that amount of time appropriate given what we know about what we know about their developmental capacity at that time. Are we testing what the child knows, or are we testing something else, the child's resilience, the child's endurance? If that's the case, then we need to stop having engaging showcases at the end of the year and just coach our kids on how to take tests, which we don't do, all right?
Well, I agree with you 100%, and I'd be happy to present that to all 16 people that have anything to do with education. If I had the specifics to show them what's going on, they don't know. I think they'll be amazed when they look at it. When I met with Tim and Kate, also talked about one of the other reductions was in central staff. And I said, what are we doing? We keep getting more and more to do with central staff, and they're lowering how much we have, or lowering the staff we have. What are we doing that we really shouldn't need to be doing that they may not understand doesn't make any sense?
And on that point and many others, we can agree, but I want to keep this simple.
Right. Oh, that's simple for
There's
that.
a lot of
This
people
will be
who
different than
complicate
that.
these conversations. Just let's not let anyone complicate it. 8-year-old, 9-year-old, how much time does it take to take the EOG test at the end of the year? And is that appropriate for measuring what the child knows? Or is that something else that tests a child's endurance and resilience that depends on a lot of other kinds of coaching for testing? Moore County Schools does not embrace that approach to testing, and we do everything we can to create engaging learning environments in our classrooms that are not driven simply by state tests. And it is hard to do because the state rewards our teachers for test performance, and the state punishes our teachers for test performance. Moore County Schools does not make that decision. That is a state decision. And that question is continuing to be averted at the state level. And I am determined to make sure that that conversation is carried forward. And I know this board supports that.
Yeah. And it's a DPI state thing to it. But that other thing I talked about was something entirely different. It has
Okay.
nothing to do with it.
All right, so
Okay.
we have a plan that we're not going to be voting on this
Till February.
next week, that we'll wait till February. And we'll make sure we communicate before then. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Something easier?
Yes, ma'am. Let's see if we can get the Rosetta Stone renewal contract into the routine column. Ms. Johnson, help us. Here.
Good afternoon. I am here to present to you the Rosetta Stone contract. As you're aware, we have used Rosetta Stone in the past for the past 3 years. It's a program that we use to help children and students learn new language. And we have varying uses of how we use it at the high school level, the middle school, and the elementary level. And so we are simply presenting this contract to you. It's over the threshold of $50,000, and so we wanted to present it to you, see if you had any questions, anything that we can help you with, and go from there.
And if the board desires a more detailed presentation on what we're doing, we can be glad to come back with that
Absolutely.
later or include that in the monthly update. But for now,
Absolutely.
this is a routine renewal, and it just happens to be over $50,000.
Absolutely, and it's a 3-year contract.
Is this only in Spanish? Is that
It
what?
is not. We have, I have it with me, we have a number of languages that we are providing. The bulk of it is Spanish. We also, though, for our English language learners at the elementary level, they're actually learning English using Rosetta Stone. And then for our high school students that are taking foreign language, they're using it for whatever foreign language they may be taking, as well as our NCVPS, some online. So we offer that to students. If the foreign language that they want to take is not offered here at our high schools, say they want to take Mandarin, then they can supplement, especially the spoken language part of it, we supplement with Rosetta Stone. So they're able to do that online course and use Rosetta as a supplement.
So you said here that the proposed contract contains 749 seats. Currently has 999 seats, so does that mean we still have 150 places we can put students if we want to, or
So
no?
you're right, we had a 3-year contract of 999
Okay.
seats. We are actually dropping back for
Oh,
some
okay.
cost savings to 749
Okay.
seats. Because when we did an analysis of how we were using the seats, we felt like we could do what we need to do with 749
Okay,
seats.
that's what I wanted to, thank you.
Our previous contract was our very first.
It was.
Rosetta Stone, certainly at this level.
And actually, we had 2,045 users last year, so the seat isn't tied to the student.
Gotcha.
And so a student might need it for one semester and not the next, so then we can use that seat for someone else. So it's very flexible in that way, so we can actually do more with less seats.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
And
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, you'll
Thank you.
note that,
Thank you.
as with all these items, the superintendent will be offering a recommendation next week. At this time, with your permission,
Sure.
I'll invite Mr. Barath to hustle to his seat. And
Okay, thank you. And as we've discussed at length throughout the last process of student assignment, I'm bringing to you the next step, Phase 2. This is for the multi-year student assignment plan that we spoke about that would expand to all the Moore County schools, elementary and middle schools. We are bringing back Numerix as our consultant for this, and we have their contract included in here for your information. We have reviewed it with our legal counsel, who have gone through it at length and approved it. And it is a not-to-exceed amount of $65,000, which will be paid through the Energy Conservation Program. And if you have any questions about the agreement, I'm here to answer them.
this would be savings that we've experienced from our application of energy management.
Energy conservation. Mhm.
Yep. And management of our energy expenses that we might conserve. But, and there's nothing more to report other than we were very satisfied with Numerix's assistance in the process that we went through in the fall. I think that's what we detected from the board. This will be a much more complex process that involves the entire district. We'll finish the work that we started in the Union Pines feeder area, and now we'll look at the entire county as we look to open these other 3 schools and address multiple issues across the county. But today is just about getting the consultants so that we can come back in February and start beginning to describe the challenges ahead of us.
So for how long, I can't exactly determine, how long is this contract for? A year?
This contract will get through the board taking action on a new student assignment plan later in the fall.
So
We're
from
currently
now
projecting
until,
October.
okay,
Now through, yes, October, November, that period.
that's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, I found the timeline helpful, so in the statement of work at the end. So it was good to see that we would be going all the way through the fall.
And as well, to look at the whole district this time around, so we can finish work on the district-wide assignment, I thought was great.
I had no other questions. Anyone else? Comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barath. Item E is also Mr. Barath. He has a bad habit of populating our agendas.
It's the season.
But it is 2019, and we have a lot of work to do, and John is doing important work. So, John, if you'll enlighten us regarding the multiple land parcel combination deed for Northmore High School.
Thank you, sir. This is very much perfunctory. With the addition work being performed at Northmore High School, one thing that has come up through the county zoning was that the Northmore High School property is comprised of multiple parcels. It was never combined into one at any time throughout its long history. And so in order to move that project along and to get through the zoning process, we need to combine it into one parcel. And so this is a matter, no property deeds or actions can be taken without school board authorization. Simply, we are taking the multiple parcels, combining them into the one. And that's what this does. The attached deed and the image you see up there are for your reference. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have regarding this action.
And you're available to answer questions throughout the week.
Absolutely.
Is there expense connected with this?
Just gonna ask that.
The only expense is legal filing, which is covered through our operating costs.
Any other questions? All right.
With your permission, Madam Chair, we'll proceed to item F. Mr. Barath.
Thank you. And as the board will recall, the approval of the early site grading package at the new Southern Pines Elementary School, one of the actions that needs to be performed there is the extension of Carlisle Street is not on our property, is on the current landowner property adjacent to our new school site. And so to perform work on that property to install the street and the utilities along there, we need to have an easement agreement for that right-of-way work, and as well as dedicating it to the town of Southern Pines upon completion. This work being performed has already been identified in our budget sheets. It is approximately $720,000 to construct that road, so there's no additional costs that have not already been identified for this project. The agreement has been worked with through our legal representatives, and it comes with our recommendation for their approval, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have regarding it.
Are there any questions, comments? Nope.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would be a problem. All right,
And
next
with your
item.
permission, Madam Chair, I'll invite Dr. Alpenfels to come forward, but we have a number of policies that the Policy Committee, Dr. Brown has been chairing that with the assistance of Dr. Alpenfels, but we also have other staff members available to answer any questions on any one of these. So for now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown and Dr. Alpenfels.
I'm here to propose the adjustments to some current policies that we have, as well as some additions to policies, because we are trying to comply with the State Board of Education policies. Any questions on any of these policies?
I had one on, I don't know if some have before 7420, 7040, I'm sorry. And it might be more of a question for staff. I was going to look at Mr. Barath, but more on section B, there's no changes to it, so this is more of a question about how we implement this policy, which is the meal changes policy. And I know there was some discussion last month about aligning the procedures that we have between the 3 high schools. Oh, there you
I
go.
might be able to answer that one.
Dr. Metcalf, there you go.
Yes, we've heard your concerns about that and appreciate that, heard the community concerns about that, appreciated that as well. And we've changed the administrative practice for the 3 high schools. They now will allow students to charge up to 2 times. Of course, each time they would notify the parents and notify the student that they need to pay the next time. But we've changed that administrative practice. That'll be in place for all 3 high schools. So it'll be consistent across the district at the high school level and went into place on January 3rd.
Because before there was just differences between the high schools, right?
Correct.
So now all the schools, the high schools
Yes.
will be the same. Okay.
And that was in compliance with the principals meeting with the staff here to work that out.
Yes.
Okay. And I know we have regulations in place, and I know you've all put them up on the website and all, and is that reviewed on a yearly basis, and cafeteria managers are up to date?
Sure, I think you're referring to the facts document, which we've just updated, as a matter of fact, to
Okay.
reflect that.
Okay, good. And there's good training and review of that.
I think we can compliment the chair for pointing out, we had some confusion on the word policy in the FAQs. And so we've clarified that to make sure that we didn't confuse anyone on the difference between a administrative procedure and a policy.
Policy.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of effort to ensure that those are followed. And in terms of getting our students who need to have free and reduced lunch, are there documents available for them throughout the year if they want to sign up for free and reduced lunch during the year? Is there some practice after the beginning of the year?
Yes.
Get that done?
It's absolutely done.
Okay.
We'll invite Mr. Barath to provide us just with a little bit more specificity.
He came to the policy committee and explained some of the procedures versus policy
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's
for us,
helpful.
Yeah.
so that we
It was
could
very
get
helpful.
clarification on that, because what you're discussing is administrative procedure, not policy.
It's helpful to
Yes.
know that,
We-
the
We
difference,
can
yeah.
clarify, though, the chair had indicated to us that she had some questions about what we do throughout the year to promote public awareness, so
Yeah.
that they can, if you don't apply for free and reduced price lunches at the beginning of the year, you can apply anytime.
That's
Is
right.
that correct, Mr.
That
Barath?
is correct. And
Perhaps
we-
talk a little bit about what we do to make sure that that information is made available and that we make sure parents are aware that they can
Yes, sir.
continue to do so.
What we do is, first of all, we have a record of those students who qualified the previous year, and those are the families we make sure we send those forms back to again, because you have to, my federal requirement, apply each year. It does not automatically roll over. So we make sure those families are getting the forms that they need to fill out. We also send forms multiple times to the school to distribute to the children to take home with them and have the parents fill out and return them back to the schools. We also then, if students start indicating that they are running into debt, into negative balances, we then reach out to the families and send also, again, home with the student and mail another form, again, for them to fill out and to return. And then after that, we continue to do calls weekly those households to inform them that this service is available to them.
Great, that's good.
Because I know that students sometimes are notorious for not returning forms, despite the fact that their parents have filled them out. Is there a way to connect the dots between a family that has an elementary child who did return his form and a middle schooler or a high school student that never managed to?
Yes, because they can fill out multiple children on one form,
Excellent.
per household, not per student.
Oh, that's good. I didn't realize that.
And in the case where all else fails, a child who doesn't have their lunch money, does that conversation, then does everybody revisit the possibility of free and reduced price lunch application? So if that form got lost, we're going to eventually find out because the child doesn't have their money for lunch. So there is a real conversation that takes place with the parent.
And this goes,
And once again, we offer the free and reduced price lunch application time and time again.
and this goes through like the counselor or the social worker, so it's not a teacher coming in and saying, oh, Johnny, you forgot to fill out this form, or your parents forgot to fill out this form. It's done privately and with the student one-on-one if need be.
Well, I'm glad the discussion was had and the practice was reviewed, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other
Thank you.
questions about any of the
Any other policy?
policies?
Questions for staff?
I lived it, so.
And I want to thank Dr. Appenfeld for
Yes,
working
thank you.
with the lawyers to make sure we have all the information said in the correct way.
Yes.
Because it takes a mountain of work to get this done. Thank you.
Yeah,
With your permission, Madam Chair?
yes.
Out-of-county field trips, Dr. Powers. He's a little slow today. Normally, he's already seated at this point.
Got too many people.
I have two out-of-state field trips for your consideration today. The first is from Pinecrest High School for their Junior Air Force ROTC cadets to travel to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania as a capstone event for their program. That trip would be April 4th through the 7th. And then also Cameron Elementary School is requesting permission for their 5th grade students to travel to Williamsburg, Virginia as a part to support the 5th grade social studies curriculum, and that trip would be March 14th and 15th.
Okay, I think these sound like wonderful trips. They're good. This is a complaint about this travel tracker thing again, which I think it's an inefficient way to report these trips. Nowhere on there does it tell you where the kids are staying. There's no hotel mentioned. Maybe they're camping out. I don't know, but it's not asked for on these forms.
That's something we could certainly add to our additional form that we have that I provide to you. You can certainly make that a part of that form. We could certainly do that.
Well, it'd be good to be able to track them down if they don't show back up at some point. I think maybe the travel tracker works well for the one-day field trip, but when it's an extended trip, especially an out-of-state one where they're gone multiple nights, it would be good to know where they are.
Travel Tracker helps us because it does allow, it can be used in throughout the district in terms of it's reported to transportation to the school, and it helps us in terms of submitting it online. But I have talked with them a little bit about trying to make some adjustments and maybe add some different things, and not been able to get that done so far, which is why we also started to use our other form again, which has helped. So
okay.
that's a good suggestion. We could certainly add that to that form for sure, and that'll help us to know as well.
Is it reasonable, Dr. Powers, to presume that, that at the point where the teacher has organized their trip, that they know where they're staying?
Absolutely, and I would say that by all means, we certainly do know where, if we don't know here, the principal knows exactly where they are and how to get in touch with them. and how
Before
to
they get
find
on the
them.
bus?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, yes, okay.
Well before.
What I'd like to do is I'd like the board to be comforted knowing that the staff knows before we ask them to approve it. If we could just either get it on the form or at least put it in the narrative for the executive summary, I think if we could move
Yeah, 'cause
forward.
they
Certainly do that.
They fill out an extra sheet on that of who's going, what hotel, and the parent involvement and all that. So we can, I mean, you don't have to go into elaborate detail on that, but just
Right.
having a
It would be
generic.
simple to add it to that form in
Yeah.
terms of just, accommodations, where are those, what's the name, address.
I also want to make note too, like I say, I think these are wonderful trips, that in all the discussion we've had about the school lunches and students not being able to afford school lunches, it also surfaced that there were kids who might not be able to go on field trips. But very adequately, there's been provision made that a child who does not have the financial resources could still make these trips because there's booster support, product sales if need be, but that it is covered and that anyone who is eligible for the trip would be able to go. And it's very good to see that.
Absolutely correct. And like you said, multiple ways that might happen through community sponsorships or fundraiser sales or school support, booster support. So you're absolutely right, yeah. No child would not be able to attend if they wanted to attend based on finances.
I'm still struck, oh, go ahead.
I would just comment, as an aside, that we have made remarkable progress for all board members who weren't on the board when Ed and I were informed that not only did we not know where the students were staying, we didn't know they were in Bermuda.
Really?
We've come a
But we're
long way
getting-
then, I
we're getting-
guess.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, I think.
Well, and I just want to underscore how important these trips are. I mean,
Yes.
many students have
Yeah.
never been out of the county, let alone let out of the state, and to be, or seen a city. You know,
Well-
I remember the first time I took my kids up to Raleigh, I mean, just pushing a button to cross the street. You know, that's.
Or getting in an
that's,
elevator.
It's something that's different, or being at the top of a hotel and looking out onto city lights. I mean, that's something that really is.
We're going to the
is-
beach for the first time.
Yeah, is really different and, you know, a life experience for these children. And I
had
think
to
it's important
explain
that we do
what
that.
a parking meter was in Raleigh, because our kids don't have any parking meters in Moore County.
Well,
Exactly right.
and to, especially seeing the fifth graders from Cameron going to the Williamsburg, Yorktown, Jamestown area, knowing this area so well, it's going to be, they cater to these students, and so it will be such a wonderful learning experience for them. I think it's a great idea, and I'm very happy that they're going to do this. And I'm sure the one in Gettysburg too, I haven't lived there, but I think the other one will.
Two other quick things just of note, just to make you aware of. Two out-of-state field trips that you have previously approved had to be rescheduled, so just for your information. Our Union Pines Junior ROTC trip to Norfolk, Virginia to the Navy base. The snow canceled that trip, so it has been rescheduled for April 1st through 3rd, so just FYI. And then the Aberdeen Primary School trip to Myrtle Beach, which was scheduled for early December, also rescheduled to May 2nd, which will be much nicer. at the
Yes,
beach.
I was
really?
gonna say,
Show me
that's
that.
so much nicer.
Like keeping them out of the water.
Dr. Paris, can we validate that with the school board monthly update? Make
Yes,
sure
sir.
that that's
Absolutely.
reported in
Any
writing.
other questions for Dr. Powers?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the staff is available to assist the board in determining its consent agenda for next week.
All right, so the only one I would have put on the consent agenda, I thought about the legislative priorities, but since we're moving that to February,
Actually, that would be board action. If you did it, it'd be the other way around.
it would be the other way around, thank you. All right, so which of these can be consent versus board action? Do you see any of these left, A
All of them
through
look fine to me for consent.
consent,
Yeah,
other
all of
than
them
B?
for consent.
Okay. All right, that finishes that. I'm going to propose a quick 5-minute break
Thank you,
before
ma'am.
we
I
walk
think the
into
staff
the
would appreciate that,
reports.
yes.
And we'll be right back.
you, Madam Chair. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Locklear and Ms. Faw. I think you're going to find the next two reports to be very instructive. A lot of practical information here on how we determine our projected enrollments of students and also the projected staffing required to teach those students. And based on our conversation earlier when Mr. Dennison was talking about your legislative priorities, I think you're going to have some very practical means by which to engage in your advocacy going forward. So, Mr. Locklear, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Grimsey, Madam Chair, Board. Good afternoon. As Dr. Grimsey noted, Kate and I have the opportunity to share with you some information and an overview of what our process has been over the last 3 years around projecting our student numbers for the next year and then using that data to make a budget projection of the number of staff we would need in core teaching positions in our K-12 classroom. And Kate, under Kate's leadership in the PAR department, we developed a tool where we're able to do that projection and then loading that data into what we call an allotment tool to project the number of teachers, get that information to our principals, and then monitor that actively throughout the summer and into the first 20 days of the school year. And then at that point, we do what we call a reconciliation process. We reconcile what was projected at each school to what the actual number that happened. And so Kate is, as we know, the person that always makes me look smart. So Kate's going to talk about our process and our tool, and I'm going to add in some editorial comments along the way. So Kate, go ahead.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we go about this process. So all of our projections are based off of Day 20 enrollment, which is used by the state for funding purposes. Once Day 20 numbers are finalized, we then promote each student up a grade level following that school's feeder pattern, and that gives us a fairly accurate predictor of next year's enrollment at each grade level and school. A 3-year kindergarten average is used because kindergarten enrollments can vary greatly year to year, upwards of an entire class in some cases. So projections are not perfect, but the systems and tools that we've built can come pretty close for us. So for purposes of projection, we do make several educated assumptions. We do assume that all seniors will graduate. We assume that all students will be promoted to the next grade level. We assume that transfer students will remain at their enrolled school or promote within that school's feeder pattern. So if a student who's out of area is attending that school, we assume that they'll follow that same pattern. And then any student within a school follows the same feeder pattern. That is true of all but one school, and it's literally less than a dozen students that it impacts. That's been fairly easy up till now, but with the openings of the new schools and the redistricting, that's going to become a little bit more challenging as we move forward. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. So this chart shows the projected allotment that we have projected for the start of the school year. It's broken down by area and feeder pattern. For example, Carthage Elementary and Sand Hills Farm Life feed into New Century and so on down the chart. Each year, the process is reviewed and refined to increase accuracy. For example, with the 1920 school year, we're considering removing exceptional children students from the grade level population, the self-contained exceptional children students, since their funding comes from a different source. Additionally, we have begun looking at student enrollment impact on the opening of McDeeds Creek Elementary based on the students' home addresses. You have a copy of this in your handouts. The first side of the copy is the projected enrollments. On the back of that is where we actually ended up, so you can see how close we were at each school.
And one thing I'll note about our projected enrollment charts is they do not include the Community Learning Center at Pinckney, because those numbers, you can't necessarily project those. Those are based on student need. What we found over the last 20 years is a range of around somewhere around 50 to 80 students in our CLC at Pinckney by day 20. And so you can always look at what we project and add roughly 70 students to that, and that'd be roughly what we're projecting as a district. So if you added 70 or so to what we projected this year, that would be about 12.6 is what we were projecting for the opening of this school year. We know we came in over that, you know, over 100 over that, but that's what we were projecting. Okay.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, we don't have the actuals, Day 20s here for this year, do we? I see 2017, 2018, no. Day 20.
That's not part of this report. We
okay,
presented
this
that prior.
We have
okay.
In the fall.
All right, I thought I had that.
Send that
okay.
back out if you'd like.
No, sorry, that was my mistake. Sorry. Okay. So we look at multiple things when taking into consideration the allotment. We look at the projection. Once the projections are complete, we begin planning for the teacher allotment needed. We allow for editing at each grade level and teacher and class size ratio. We account for that K-3 class size regulation that we've been talking about a whole lot. We allow for the identification of class size impact and class size averages. All of that's built into the tool. And then we calculate a number of core teachers needed in K-8 and all teachers at 9-12 as well.
So this tool that Kate and her department have developed allows us to take those projected student numbers and roll them into a very complex Excel tool that allows us to make sure we're complying with state law with class size ratios in K-3, and then allows us to look at where we should place our ratios in 4 through 12. We try to keep those within a ratio that will keep class size at best as possible within our budget constraints. And so that's what this tool allows us to do. And then once that data is entered into the tool, it tells us the total number of teachers, core teachers we would have projected for our budget projections and for us to make plans for the following year.
In addition to the district's master planning tool that we've built within Excel, we've also built individual school tools to help them track and project their actual enrollment numbers. Since all enrollment projections are based on day 20, it's not uncommon for an individual school to see an increase or a decrease in population over the course of the year and specifically over the summer. Additionally, since kindergarten enrollment is based on a 3-year average, it is possible that a school has substantially more or substantially less students actually enroll. The administrator tool allows principals to keep track of their allotments and make adjustments to their hiring based on the ever-shifting daily numbers. If a principal feels that they may need additional teachers due to current numbers, they can use this tool that we've built and work with senior leadership on allotments.
And this is an example of how our process has continued to be refined over the last 3 budget seasons. You noted that when I introduced our process, I talked about we project student numbers and project the number of teachers a school will have, but then there's this idea called a reconciliation process once we have our official numbers after day 20. And so this tool allows a principal to actively monitor the actual. Where are they actually through the summer? Are they meeting what we thought they would have? Are they way over it? Do they need to want to have a conversation with me and say, oh, Mr. Lockley, we're way over what we're projected. Can we talk about, is there a possibility to allot additional positions? So it's a way for that principal to, with their team, to monitor actively where they are throughout the summer into the first days of school.
This is a sample of the administrator planning tool for an elementary school, although all the grade levels look very similar. The administrator tool is a pared-down version of our district's planning tool, and it's built within Google Sheets. It allows the formula, it's built into the formulas to account for all the rules and various scenarios. Each school has their own tool, and it provides a side-by-side of what is projected and their current ever-changing reality. So on the left-hand side is what is set. That's what we projected. That's exactly how we came up with the math for how many students we project them to have, how many teachers they'll need, any adjustments that we make. On the right-hand side is in the purple is where the administrators can go in and change their enrollment numbers. The calculation automatically fills in. Any place you see green, they can type in the number. So, for example, in this sample, they were projected to have 60 kindergarten students. They're saying that they have 69. That's a difference of a teacher. So that's where the conversation would then start. So they can do this and plug in and change those numbers daily and sometimes hourly.
That helps with space planning too, I imagine.
Exactly.
Especially for the younger grades.
Exactly. During the first 20 days of school, the PAR department monitors enrollment daily and adjusts the tool every 5 days to ensure compliance with all laws and regulations and monitor allotment needs at any grade level. After the first month of school, the tool is updated every 20 days and reviewed with senior leadership so that timely adjustments to teacher allotments can be made throughout the year.
So this is an example of the tool, this is the tool that we use to make sure we're in compliance with the K-3 class size law. And as we've demonstrated through our submission, and you have endorsed the last 2 years, our district, I believe, is the best at doing this. Kate, her team's leadership and monitoring this and looking at this should be commended. It's a great tool that they developed. So the final 2 slides really talk about the outcomes of the 2019 allotment process. And through this tool that we had, through day 20, we were able to actively monitor throughout the summer into the first 20 days of school. And through that, we were required, because we don't have a choice by law, to push out 7 K-3 positions. We also transferred a position through this active monitoring from High Falls to Robbins at the K-3 level. So through that active monitoring of where students were and where it was needed. In addition, because we knew we had budget constraints and we only could push out so many teachers because the budget only approved so many teachers, that this tool also allows us to understand we don't have any more teachers but this finite number. And as a result of that, we've got to freeze where we are in 412. And so that's what, by having this tool, we're able to be physically responsible based on where we are. We don't want to be there. We want to be able to push out teachers based on qualifications at the 412 level from the ratios that we've set. But we also know we have a budget that's been passed and we have to stay within those constraints. And so this allowed us to understand that. We froze where we were in 412. We also reverted some unfilled positions in grades 412. So overall, if you looked at the impact of that in grades 4-8 especially, there were 7 positions that we did not push out that those schools qualified under based on the ratios that we had set in this tool. And so that means that at the middle school level and in some 4th and 5th grade classrooms, based on the ratios that we set of 1 teacher to 26.5 at the 4th and 5th grade level and 1 teacher to 25 at the 4th through 6th grade level, we did not push out additional teachers once they qualified for more because we had constraint of a budget that did not allow us to do that.
Tim, please define your use of the term push out one more time, just make sure everybody understands what that means.
That might be one of my southern terms, sir, so I apologize. But what it means is basically we allot an additional position to the school based on the numbers qualifying them for that additional full-time equivalent teacher position.
If we had had money for these 7 positions, would we have had space in the schools?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Go back to the previous slide. It said you reverted 4 positions. So those schools, I'm sorry, you reverted unfilled positions at 4 schools.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the relationship between those 4 schools, those positions, and then the 7 positions that we didn't push out?
Those.
Are they completely different?
They're completely different.
Okay, so it's school related.
So you add those together, that's 11 positions. But the reverted positions were, because we had the constraints, there were 4 full-time positions that had not been filled, and we reverted those positions.
Right, now, when you say they had not been filled, there are 4 positions that had not been assigned to schools?
Had not been filled by teachers, they were currently projected.
Vacant.
Vacant at schools, yes, sir.
And so when you say you reverted those vacancies, what did you do with them?
We pulled them back into the district number of teachers in order to push out 7 K-3 positions.
Now we're getting to
I
the
get
word
it.
push
Now,
out.
thank
You
you.
brought them in so you could push them out, okay?
Not related to the next bullet, it's related to the first bullet.
Next time we add a slide that says vocabulary. Right? Glossary.
We talk this all the time, so I apologize for.
All right, so let's go back through this one more time. We're going to stay on this particular slide. I'm detecting up here, and also the reporter sitting over your shoulder is reading her nonverbal cues here a little bit. So we're going to make sure that we understand there were 4 positions that were vacant in their schools. They had not been filled.
That's correct.
And why were they not filled at that point? We hadn't located teachers to take the positions?
Because some of that was because their student numbers weren't showing they were still showing to be on the edge for the need for those positions.
So projections had been that we would need
That's
those
correct.
spots there, but that didn't come through. Okay.
And there was at least 2 places where they just hadn't filled that position. And because of that, because of the need for the position in order to be able to use it at the K-3 level, it was reverted.
And so I'm guessing those 4 schools that you mentioned were all 4 through 12 schools.
There were 412 schools, yes, ma'am.
And so by day 20, you pushed out 7 positions that previously had not been projected. In other words, they emerged over the summer and into the early part of the fall. So you had to do something about it because the law said you had to.
That's correct.
Had more children.
Right, and so now you're going to reconcile, where'd you get the 7 from? and those 7 came from 4 that were unfilled that you reverted. The other 3 came from 1 that you switched from one school to another.
And the others came from some growth in our state teacher planning allotment. That we did get some additional teachers, plus we did get allotted the enhancement teacher allotment that Mr. Dennison was mentioning earlier from the House Bill 90.
What that did was keep you from having to cut
That's correct.
art, music, and PE, but that didn't give you extra positions. That just helped you keep from cutting positions.
It's kept us from cutting any additional positions. That's
right.
correct.
And then you could have added 7 more positions in 4-8 grades 4 through 8 based on the numbers, but we didn't have the funding for it.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct. And this
I got it
leads
now.
into our next presentation
Okay.
on class size, and you'll see how not being able to push out a lot or give additional teachers to our 4-8 classrooms, especially our middle school classrooms, really pushes up those class size averages and maxes. And so we'll see the impact of this process. And we may also want to recall that in our budget last year that the board approved, because of the constraints that we were looking at and because of decreased enrollment over some time, we reduced our teachers by 15. And so we had that constraint. As we're looking at monitoring this process, we have to be physically responsible. And so that's part of why you see some of these impact and outcomes.
So is there a little bit of a relationship then between the K-3 class sizes and sizes 4 through, classes sizes in 4 through 12?
Yes, ma'am.
Most definitely. We'll see that in the next report.
The state no longer comes back after the 20th day and says, oh, y'all got so many kids, we're going to give you another teacher?
You have to be over 100 past what their planning allotment for you is, and you request it. It's not guaranteed.
And
We weren't
likewise,
quite there this year.
likewise, is the state able to take away if your numbers
They
go
will
down?
most definitely take
Oh, they'll
away.
take
You
away.
can be guaranteed of that one.
Yes, sir.
Understood, Mrs.
Oh,
Carter?
yeah.
Roughly 100
I'm glad I'm
kids
not in
over-
Wake County.
Are you surprised?
No.
No.
Roughly, that's 4 teachers. 100 kids over, you may receive 4 additional teachers.
If you lose 100, you're assured that you will lose 4, and that has happened.
Yes, sir. We have historically shown that, which is part of why we were looking at the 15 teacher reduction.
Board members, keep in mind that the allotment of teachers from the state is based on the assumption that all of the children are housed in the same building. And so when you have variations in sizes of buildings, which will show itself in this next presentation, the differences can be dramatic. When you're down to only 2 sections in a given grade level, and you've got, say, 28 children, or let's say 27 children in K through 3, you're gonna have to have 2 teachers. You're gonna have to get that down, and even if it's below, you can't, there's nothing else you can do, because to have only 1 teacher, it's 1 to 27. You have 2 teachers, it's 1 to 13.5.
Now, go over how how they allot teachers 4 through 12. If all the kids were in one school, it's coming up, okay.
Yeah, let's proceed and see.
Okay, as long as it's coming up, yeah.
One more real quick. Do y'all send your projections to the state? Or they just create their own in their own formula?
They do pull our day 20 and day 40 and day 60 attendance numbers for validation purposes, but we don't send our projections. And so this shows us, and has shown us over time, this is a quick summary point, that this is another example of where you have some unknown factors. We've talked about that in the budget process in the past, of having some unknown state impacts. We're not knowing what's going to happen with the state budget. This is an example of a place where we have some unknown factors, especially with the K-3 class size law, where we have to allot additional teachers at the K-3 level if those schools grow more than we've projected. Or even as the class law goes down, you have to push them out. And so this is an example of a place where some unanticipated growth can impact your budget, and it would be something to consider for the board moving forward, to perhaps think about some allotment of money that could be used or for this unpredictable growth that you might have to help at the 412 level because of the requirements that you have at the K.
Which we'll see when you show them the numbers.
Yes, sir. I just
Soon.
wanted to make that as a summary.
Very soon.
Yes, sir, right now.
That's even better.
So we can pull up our next report. Our next report is a class size report, unless there's any other questions on this historical analysis.
I just want to thank you for providing the tool. You've talked about it before, and I haven't seen it, so it's great methodology, obviously, and it's very helpful to you and the teachers or the staff.
So I think we can go right into our presentation on the 2018 core class size report. This is exemplified from the process that we just explained. I think you'll see a lot of connections on the impacts of what we've had to do at the K3 level on class size across our district. And so I'm going to let Kate walk us through this, and I'll make a couple comments as we walk through.
Okay.
Kate?
The state law regarding class sizes in K3 states that this year, individual class sizes can have no more than 23 students, and that the district average cannot exceed 1 to 20. In order to ensure compliance with these hard caps, we must round up in all cases, meaning that if a school has 23 kindergarten students, they get 1 teacher. But the moment they have a 24th student enrolled, they get 2 teachers, taking their class size down to 1 to 12. In order to meet this requirement, we have set our K3 class size average at each school to 22, and we have had to increase the class size averages in grade 4 through 12 to accommodate. So we've set our class size averages at 1 to 26.5 in 4th and 5th grade, 1 to 25 in middle school, and 1 to 29 in high school. In grades 4 through 12, ratios are done by total population, in grades 6 through 12, ratios are done by total population and not by individual grade level. Since there is no hard cap set by the state, traditional rounding rules are going to apply, determining allotments in these grades. This means that going over the average does not automatically assume you qualify for another teaching position. For example, in 4th and 5th grade, class size ratios of 1 to 26.5, it would actually take 40 students before you qualified for a second teacher.
Where in K3, it takes just going over that cap, 24 students. So you have to go multiple students. And that's even to go over what we set the ratio. Moore County Schools sets the ratio at. Even at that ratio, we were still not able to push out additional teachers this year.
Now, this
Because
board,
of our budget constraints.
right, this board could direct the staff in putting the budget together, that this board does not want to exceed that, and that they want a budget that is requested that provides the number of teachers that maintains, that this board could work with the county commissioners and say, together, we will agree on a certain pupil-teacher ratio. And that becomes a standard for the budget that we direct the staff to bring to us. You could consider this, or you could ask us to make a recommendation when we start to develop the budget. When you have your budget meeting on the 22nd, this could be a conversation you might want to have, where you look at these numbers tonight and you decide among yourselves, we're going to draw some lines in the sand here, and when we go over that amount, what number of full-time equivalent new locally funded teaching positions would it take to hold the line on that pupil-teacher ratio, or indeed reduce it? So that is a conversation that we would be ready to have if you were interested. Proceed.
Those are guidelines, and here's the impact. Overall, the district K5 class size average is 18.5. However, it is important to note that 4th and 5th grade classrooms are substantially larger. When we look at the average class size in K3 compared to 4-5, you can see that it's close to 6 students more on average in the higher grades, jumping from about 16.4 to 22.5. While the maximum class size in any core K3 classroom does not exceed 23, the current maximum class size for grades 4 through 5 is 30 to 31, which is occurring at multiple schools, including Westmore, Vass, and Pinehurst. In addition, non-core classes, often referred to as enhancement classes, can be upwards of 35 students.
Did you want to switch, did you think, I think that next table actually supports what you were just saying.
The next table is the middle school.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah.
Anything for that one? Okay.
You covered it well, Kate.
Good, thanks. There are substantial differences in how classes are scheduled at the secondary level compared to elementary, and there are also significant variances in how middle school schedules even among themselves. For example, one school you could have a teacher who teaches only 1 or 2 subjects, where at another school, the same grade level, they might teach all 4 subjects. In addition, you may or may not set up those middle schools to do team teaching, and these charts are the most effective way to view class size averages when looking at those levels. So you'll see each middle school across the top. You'll see the average middle school class size, And then the last column is the maximum class size in middle school. The middle school class size is built using a 1 to 25 class size ratio, and while the average class size ratio for the core classes is 1 to 23.75, the current maximum is in the mid-30s. This is happening in science, social studies classrooms across the district, with at least one school, Cranes Creek, having a social studies class of 1 to 37.
Quick question. We've got the core subjects here. What happens with the electives that middle grade students, how big are some of those class sizes? Do we know?
We do. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me,
Okay.
but they are substantially higher than
That's
they
what I
would be
thought.
because
Okay.
of the selection available and the number of students taking those classes.
More
Same
than
is true in
more
high
than
school.
37?
At the middle school level, I'd have to verify it comes close.
Maybe a couple physical education.
There are some physical education
Sure,
classes
yeah.
that are at high. I believe the band is that high. And then at the high school level, it's even higher in those elective courses.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kate, if I could clarify, the statement I made earlier, I misread that, but I will say that the PowerPoint does not include your statement about the maximums
Not at the
in
elementary
grades
school
4 and 5.
Right,
And the
that is
board may be interested in having that in writing.
Okay.
If we can put that together sometime, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Where you list the Moore County max, that's the largest number we have in a classroom, correct?
In that grade span,
In that
correct.
grade. Did we try and establish a maximum?
We're incapable of doing that. I'll tell you.
Well, the teachers are just not there to add more,
Well,
obviously, but-
this has to do with the variation in sizes of schools. And what you have is, everything is driven by the average. And so in a given school, if you were to add, where you have that class with 37 in it, you would have to go down, in that school, you'd have to go down to an 18.9, 18.5 to 1 ratio if you added another teacher. That is so substantially below the average that we've put staff into a Solomon's choice scenario here, where you just don't have the money for that. So a single additional teacher there gets you down to a pupil-teacher ratio that's so far below your average. The average for 6 through 8 is 22.8. So at that particular school, you're presuming you have enough money to drop your pupil-teacher ratio 4 students below what your average is. We don't have that kind of money. Our budget is that tight, right? And this is good for the public to see this, because it's very difficult to understand how this works. I've been in these classrooms with this many students. It's not pleasant. Having said that, we have teachers doing an excellent job, but I don't think any legislator gets off the hook. Any legislator gets off the hook because of that. That is not a pleasant place to teach when a teacher's got that many papers to grade and that many students to keep up with. And I think it's admirable that they do the job that they do. But that when you think in terms of, well, why can't you just put another teacher in there? Think of what that pupil-teacher ratio would be. Once you get down to 4 and 5 below what your average is, you all haven't allocated that kind of money. The commissioners have not given us that kind of money. That's your fiscal reality.
And I'm concerned too with the science and the math areas. I mean, language needs to say, I think of all the papers that teachers have to grade. But how can they do any kind of science experiments when you have 25 to 36 in a class?
Very creative.
I mean, that's
As a budget reflection, let me offer, we cut 15 FTEs out of locally funded full-time equivalent teachers. And then there were 7 additional K through 3 positions we needed after we cut the 15.
Yes.
So that's a net loss in 4 through 12 of
23.
7 plus 15.
22. Math was not my thing.
So that, you just don't do that and assume that these numbers are gonna look good when you're done. And it's shocking to see it, but it should come as no surprise. It is no surprise to me.
And that, again, is where our previous presentation connects to the class size impact of where we were. And 5 of the 7 teachers we would have allotted out would have been at the middle school level. So that's why we see some of our most significant impacts there at Cranes Creek, New Century, Southern Middle. Are the 3 places that would earn 5 more positions based on the ratios we set that we weren't able to honor because of our budget constraints.
Can you explain, just going back to the other one real quick, can you just explain why there are different ratios in different classes? Isn't it presumably the same students taking all these classes? So for instance, language has 19.95 at Cranes Creek, but science is a 29.86. Aren't they going through their day?
That's based on how Cranes Creek, the middle school schedule,
So it's
there's
their
variations
scheduling
on
then.
the teaming
Okay.
schedule. And Cranes Creek, for example, has utilized a creative schedule to have lower class sizes in language arts and math.
Okay.
And push some higher class sizes, meaning they have another teacher or two in
As a
language arts
testing,
and math
okay.
than they do in science and social studies.
And that
So
reflects their needs at Cranes Creek.
That's
Thank you
correct.
for explaining that.
So they've chosen to employ a creative schedule to do that, and there's some pluses and minuses for doing that. And Mike continues to work with Melanie moving forward, but you can see how it's a little more balanced coming across at the other schools. It's a good question.
Okay. So here you have the exact same information for the high school. You have Northmore, Pinecrest, and Union Pines. As Mr. Locklear said, we don't include the Community Learning Center just due to the uniqueness of that school. Do note that that MCS average is the MCS average in 912. So that is just the high school average and the high school max that you're looking at there. The high school classes are set at 1 to 29. However, the science and social studies classes are running substantially higher, with several schools having classes of 1 to 35 or 1 to 37. What this chart does not show is the impact of core class guidelines on non-core classes. These elective courses are usually much larger depending on the subject, and that is true across the board at all schools and all encores.
How do you figure the CTE classes in on that? Because they have restricted numbers, don't they?
Yes, in terms of our averages that we're looking at, we include them with the encore classes.
And this last chart is one you've seen before. This is as we look towards our projections for next year and look at what our needs will be in K-3. This chart shows the implementation of House Bill 90 that phases in the class size requirements. We can see that in the 1920 school year, the district average next year will be 1 to 19, where this year it was 1 to 20, and the cap, the hard cap, will be 1 to 22, where this year it's 1 to 23. And then you can see how that phases into the allotted rate of the law at 1 to 18 in kindergarten, 1 to 16 in first grade, and then 1 to 17 in second and third. So you can see how that phases in over the next 3 years. So just for your information as we're moving forward.
When you compare where the class size averages were in 16-17, before the K-3 class size law took effect, to where we are now, you can see that while there was a significant decrease in the core classes in K-3, there has been an increase in the average class size in all other grade levels. It should be noted that the class size average in 9-12 seems not to have seen such a large change. A majority of that is attributed to how high schools schedule and the availability of more sections and subjects, specifically those elective classes that we referenced earlier.
And I would also note again those examples that Kate shared about our elective classes at the high school and some of the numbers of students that they take in some of their classes, whether it be a weightlifting class, whether it be band, that's got 40, 50 students in it. That has a positive impact across our core classes, being able to spread students out. And high schools have a little more flexibility in order to do that. But this still is, you can see some significant impacts from prior to the class size law and to where we are now. Even though it's only about almost one student in 4 or 5, that's still significant when you think about average. But when you're looking at that middle school, that's where we saw our highest. And you can see a very significant impact at the middle school level. As our middle schools continue to stay true to something that we know works for middle schools, which is that teaming, and you can see how that's impacted them.
How does the Sandhills Community College classes, how do they get calculated in here, or are they not calculated?
They're not included in the calculation.
Okay.
Which is why, that's
another reason why it's lower.
those 9-12
Okay.
classrooms.
It is a factor that has helped mitigate the growth. If it wasn't for that, this number would be substantially worse.
Absolutely, substantially higher.
Right.
I look at those middle school numbers, and that's just, that's huge. That's a big jump in 3 years.
Well, and I look at the grade 4 and 5, because I think about as a teacher trying to connect with 28 students, with everyone having a different ability and learning ability. That's very hard to do, and it's not every child gets the best education when there's 28 children in a classroom. Behavior problems exist. It's just I would like to see something. Maybe something we can do about that. And I know that they broke it down where they team teach, but it's still putting 28 kids and 28 kids. It's not reducing anything for 4 and 5. Yeah, so that's really my concern. I would love to see that if we could do local money on that, but that's just like Jell-O. You take one thing away and you're taking, you're bringing something in, you're taking another thing away. So unless we get more money from the...
About how many schools in 4 and 5 are kind of trying to departmentalize to a certain extent, where there are certain teachers teaching English language arts and social studies and certain ones teaching math and science?
I believe we have all but 2 of our schools that are doing some teaming at the 4th and 5th grade level.
And that helps some.
Yeah, a lot of that's because of grading, testing, and that does help. It's just still the same amount of kids, though. But it's a little less for the teacher, I think.
I know when we gain a student in K through 3 and it throws us over the maximum, we have to add a teacher immediately. When we lose a student mid-year, are we eliminating a position at that point? Or do we just maintain the classrooms because it would disrupt the children?
Yes, ma'am. And because a lot of our classrooms that are right on that teeter-tottering place may lose one and 2 days later gain it back because of some in and out of student population.
And we know it changes.
Had that situation happen just at Robbins Elementary over the weekend. Friday, they went below. Today, they enrolled a couple. They're back over. So you see staying on that teeter-tottering place a lot. So we try to make things as fluid as we
It
possibly
just becomes problematic when that teeter-totter is resting on a point where it's right on the state requirement. And one up or one down, and that, you may, that's the kind of thing you don't know in Raleigh when you're acting on this kind of a law, where you don't have any discretion at the local level.
We don't have fund balance to be able to make that up
We don't have
either.
fund balance. Up until these last couple of years, we would have been in a position where we might have just been able to help the situation where numbers had gone up without disrupting a situation where the numbers were going down. We might just ride that out through the rest of the year and then make the change between budget years. What has been different this year is those changes that were made after the school year started. And that affected how many classrooms, Tim? It was High Falls and Robbins, and then there were...
That's been the only...
That's the only one where we actually pulled somebody out of one school and put it into another
This year.
school.
Last year, we had a couple examples of that, but this year's one.
Okay, and to their credit, the faculties at both schools did a fantastic job with that. But that is a very difficult process after you've started the school year. We're not alone, though. I mean, that happens in a lot of other places, and
Think about the child, too. Having a teacher all the way through Christmas, and then all of a sudden you're in another classroom with different students, just because that one child raised the average class size. So that's hard.
I have a question on the allotment. I understand, is this correct for kindergarten, take all our kindergartners and divide it by 18, that's the number of teachers we get?
Yes.
From the state, right? And first grade 16 and then 17 for second and third.
that's correct.
Okay. How are the teachers allotted for all the other classes?
Without having...
Not what we want, but how are they allotted?
It's 1 to 24 in 4th and 5th grade.
So they do
Mike,
have
correct
limits
me if
then.
I'm wrong. Mike probably knows it better than I do off the top of his head. It's 1 to 24, 4th, 5th grade, 1 to 26.5 at 6th grade through 9th grade, and 1 to 28. Is it 28 or 29? We'll have to verify that, but it's 1 to 28 or 1 to 29 at 10th grade through 12th grade.
Okay.
That was just off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't have
those
my-
the state allotments that you're talking about?
That's the state, how state pushes out allotments. That's correct.
Yeah,
So they fund it.
They fund it,
They
but
fund it based on
you
that.
don't have everybody in the RBC center. And so and that is, that's where it doesn't work out perfectly, obviously.
So,
Employment approach, you know, it's all one big group, and that's how they fund you, but that doesn't meet the needs of the individual schools or the individual classes.
well, to me, if they're doing that, they're in effect saying that what the class sizes should be, aren't they?
But there's no hard cap.
Yeah.
Well, and this eliminates
What do
your
you mean
electives
there's no
too.
hard cap?
Yeah.
Don't they stick with like 1 to 24 for 4 through 5?
They'll allot that way, but if you go over 1 to 24.
No, but I mean
requirement
yeah.
Their argument, Mr. Dennison, would be that we should not be dividing the children into a lot of different buildings, that all
I know
students
that,
in Moore
yeah,
County
yeah.
should be in one high school instead of
Yeah.
being divided up into 3 high schools. And I've heard that from at least one
Oh,
legislator.
yeah, they don't understand. So, and that's based on our, what are those ratios that they're using based on? 20-day count or projection for next year, or,
They have a planning allotment projection that they
Okay.
use, that they base that off of, and that's that number that we have to get within 100 students of that number, not to be in danger of losing positions.
So in terms of a legislative priority for us, it could be to lower that allotment ratio. That could be the statement, is to lower the allotment ratio for each of those 3, the 4th, 5th graders, the 6 through 9, and the 10 through 12.
That'd be more cost-effective than a cap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you put a cap, then
Right.
it just blows the lid off of, they'd never consider that. But if you were to lower that ratio, then they would give us more positions, and then we could choose how to allocate
Based on the
that,
number
yeah.
of schools.
Where it went.
Well, and, you know, it eliminates all of our elective teachers, and of course pushes our high school kids to go on to the college to take classes. 'Cause I know at one point there were 7 speech classes at Pinecrest. Now there are 2. And that's because you can't allocate another English teacher to go in there and teach, because then the English classes all jump to 35. Yeah. And so you can't take a speech class anymore.
and these just are classroom teachers, right? Nobody else?
These are core
These are
core
just,
classrooms, not
At
electives.
the K-8 level, our numbers, those numbers are just core classroom teachers. At the 9-12 level, it includes some of our elective teachers, not including CT.
According to a formula.
Okay.
Could you,
I
could
guess
you
they-
let us know in the 9-12, besides the core classes or the core subject academics, what other areas are included in the allocation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
We'll make sure that's part of our report on January 22nd. We're going to project our student numbers for next year in that board budget retreat, and also talk about the number of teachers we're projecting the need for planning for the budget. We can make sure we include that information.
Well, this will help when Mr. Dennison and I talk to the legislatures about some of this.
What is not allocated? Drama, well, it's considered a drama.
It's all part of that
teacher.
1 to 28 or 1 to 29 that they allot for the high school.
Okay.
At the middle school and elementary
Big core.
level, they just now have started a separate enhancement teacher
Yeah.
allotment at the K-5 level.
Understood.
We received roughly 7 teachers last year for that allotment. Well, we fund at the K-8 level 68
Yeah.
enhancement or elective teachers at the K-8 level. So
So-
those are locally paid teachers.
But they're expanding the number of those that they fund each
Right,
year.
gradually. I thought it was just
Approximately
K-3 they were
7
going there, but
additional
they're doing
teachers
K-5? Okay.
They support K-5.
It's one enhancement
Or
teacher
like,
per
yeah,
191
100 and some
K-5
students, yeah.
A funny number.
Repeat that, Tim.
One enhancement teacher per 191 K-5 students is what the state's ratio is for pushing out enhancement, which is our elected teachers.
So that's art, music, and/or PE.
That's correct. Or if you offered foreign world language, that. We got a quarter of that last year, we'll get a quarter of it next year, and then they'll do 25% each year to build up to
Over
the
a
full
4-year period of time.
Yes.
Mr. Rocco, when we get the number from the state, say Moore County gets 300 high school teachers in the allotment, and so then you call Pinecrest and you tell them, well, y'all are going to have 125, and Union Pines gets 110, or whatever, however it breaks down. Do you then work with the principals to figure out how to make the best use of these teachers? Or is that left up to the individual principal at the school to figure out his ratio?
it is left up for the most part to the individual principal working with their school teams to put together a master schedule that supports student needs. So that all starts back when they start registering in the early spring, driving the schedule and the development of that matrix. And so that's built based on that. So we
would
do
say
give a lot of autonomy to our schools.
We give them a lot of autonomy, but it's still subject to final approval by you and Dr. Metcalf.
Sure, absolutely.
So you could look at it and say, that AP class with 37 students is not going to work.
And we have those
Go back
type of
to them.
conversations with them or that AP class with 2 kids.
Doesn't work.
It's probably more likely.
Yeah.
The conversation we may have when they're saying, we need another teacher. Well, let's take a look at your schedule and your matrix. There may be a situation you can't offer that, where 3-4 years ago, we could offer an AP class with 10 kids, but today, you can't do that.
Not an environment for that. Great information. Are there any other questions or comments?
I told you you'd find that interesting.
Gave me about 100 hours more work.
It's a good thing we gave you a month to finish up the legislative priority.
I've already been working on it 6 months.
We appreciate that, Ed.
Madam Chairman, the administration has
Rests.
presented all,
Rests.
we've presented all we have to
Thank you,
present.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right, the last item on the agenda, board comments. Mr. Cunningham?
On the heels of the last 2 presentations, I would comment that they were very interesting, very helpful, and during the presentations, I kept flashing back to driving by McDeeds Creek Elementary last weekend and seeing this extraordinary facility taking shape, and thinking to myself and hoping that when Aberdeen and Southern Pines are completed, that as difficult as it was now to project, it'll be more difficult over the next several years to project enrollment increases because of the large number of students who live within the districts of those 2 schools. And if they're anything like McDeeds Creek, it's going to be very attractive. So I just thank you for giving one piece. I kept thinking, this looks like just majestic. You gave us a lot to think about.
Dr. Brett?
That's an
And the
understatement.
last comment is following up Helena's request. I too would like to have the actual 20-day ADM from this year.
Yeah, we've presented
Is
that
it-
previously.
yeah,
We'll
just-
resend that.
we have that.
Yeah, we'll resend that. Thank you. Thank you.
It makes me a little scared when January 22nd comes up and we have to do all this budget. Mr. Bundy, I think we're in for a long haul this year.
I would like, I lost my paper when I was talking to you all about the thing. So board members, please read this. It explains in very simple language exactly how you tie together the school score and the 1015 and the median growth. That's it.
I don't have
Excuse me,
anything.
and I'll send you hard copies of the charts I gave you. It's in Excel, so you can change it around and put it in whatever order you want. It's interesting to look at them.
Will that be the same thing we gave to Mary Kate tonight?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Would you like me to send a hard copy to her?
If there's anything new, we just want to make sure she gets.
Oh, it's all in the same form, but she can't divide hers unless she has a electronic.
We don't want her to divide hers. And I don't think she wants to either. She doesn't get paid for that. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
I don't have anything. Very informative work session this evening.
Yeah, I don't really have much. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody working over the holidays to get all this stuff together, because I know you all did, even though you said you didn't. But I know it takes a lot of work to figure all this out and get this going, and I appreciate it.
And I'm pleased to see that, in all that work our senior staff has been doing, that you have made such progress in consistency within our lunchroom programs, to know that our policies are going to be aligned, our procedures are going to be further aligned, and that we'll make sure that we have kids getting lunches We need to get them.
And I just want to say that this is a good preview of the next 6 months. You know, it's, I think back to the beginning of the year in July, the beginning of our academic year, and we're only halfway through, and we've done a lot. And I appreciate everybody's, both staff and board members' work. Got another 6 months to go. There's a lot that needs to get done that we've heard today, from redistricting to the budget, to looking at our legislative priorities and trying to look at where we're going to go next. So we'll get there. So it doesn't stop, but there's been a lot of great work, and the momentum is rolling. So thank you all.
And the other component that kept going through my mind about the difficulty of projection is the difficulty of redistricting over the next 12 months.
That may be pie compared to the budget.
Well, and let's remember we'll have some good things to celebrate in the next few months, too. There'll be a few more groundbreakings, which is very exciting.
Good problem to have.
Yeah.
Give me
Yes,
more
you're right.
problems like this.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you all. All right, is there a,
So move. Meeting be adjourned.
I always count on you, Ed. A second?
Just seconded
All
by Ms.
those-
Thompson.
All those in favor say aye for
Aye.
adjournment. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, everybody.